The hospital corridor reeked of disinfectant and despair. Muhammad Ali sat motionless in the plastic chair, his once powerful hands trembling slightly as Parkinson's disease continued its relentless assault on the body that had danced like a butterfly and stung like a bee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. "Where is your God now?" The voice belonged to Dr. Richard Steinberg, a neurologist whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his contempt for what he called religious delusions. He stood in the doorway of the children's oncology ward, his white coat pristine, his expression cold as winter steel. Ali looked up slowly, his eyes still sharp despite everything the disease had taken from him. Around them, the pediatric wing hummed with quiet activity. Nurses moved between rooms where children fought battles far more brutal than any boxing ring could offer. My God! Ali's voice was softer now, but it carried the same conviction that had once declared he would float like a butterfly. "He's right here, Doc. In every breath these kids take, in every smile they give their mamas when they're scared, in every nurse who stays past her shift because little Tommy can't sleep without someone holding his hand." "Doctor," Steinberg scoffed, adjusting his glasses with surgical precision. "Platitudes won't cure cancer, Mr. Ali. Science will, medicine will, not prayer, not faith, not whatever comforting lies people tell themselves when reality becomes unbearable." The conversation had started an hour earlier when Ali arrived for his regular visits to the children's ward. It was something he'd been doing quietly for years, long after his boxing career ended, long after the cameras stopped following his every move. He would sit with sick children, tell them stories, make them laugh when laughter seemed impossible. Today was different. Today, Dr. Steinberg had finally confronted him about what the physicians saw as false hope being peddled to vulnerable families. "You see that little girl over there?" Ali nodded toward 8-year-old Maria Santos, who was coloring in a book despite the IV tube snaking from her thin arms. "Her mama told me yesterday that Maria prays every night. Not for herself to get better, but for her little brother to do good in school, for her daddy to find work, for other kids here to go home healthy." Dr. Steinberg glanced at Maria, his expression unchanged. Childhood conditioning. She's been taught to believe in fairy tales because the alternative is too frightening for a developing mind to process. "We, or maybe," Ali said, rising slowly from his chair, "she understands something you spent so many years in medical school that you forgot how to see." The hallway seemed to grow quieter. Even the usual hospital sounds, beeping monitors, rolling gurneys, hushed conversations, faded into background whispers. And what exactly would that be? Dr. Steinberg's tone carried the patronizing edge of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in every room. Ali walked toward Maria's room, his movements careful but determined. Dr. Steinberg followed, curiosity overriding his skepticism. Inside the small room, Maria looked up from her coloring book and smiled. It was the kind of smile that could power a small city, bright and genuine and completely unaware of its own power. "Mr. Ali!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of family dinners filled with Spanish laughter and abuela's stories. "I drew you a picture." She held up her artwork, a crayon drawing of a man in boxing gloves standing next to a little girl. Both figures were smiling, surrounded by what appeared to be stars or maybe flowers. It was impossible to tell, but it didn't matter. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Ali said, accepting the drawing with hands that shook slightly, but held it as if it were made of spun gold. "Tell me about it." "That's you and me," Maria explained with the matter-of-fact tone that only children possess. "We're in heaven, but not the scary kind, the kind where everyone gets to be happy and nobody hurts anymore." Dr. Steinberg shifted uncomfortably. "Maria, you know that heaven is just a story people tell, right? Like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy." Maria looked at him with the kind of patience usually reserved for adults who didn't understand obvious things. Doctor, Steinberg, you're really smart about medicine and stuff, but some things aren't about being smart. They're about being true. Truth requires evidence, Dr. Steinberg replied, his voice gentler now but still firm. Empirical data, reproducible results. Like love? Maria asked innocently. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Steinberg opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Ali sat down beside Maria's bed, his movements careful but purposeful. Doc, can you measure love in a test tube? Can you weigh it on a scale? Can you see it under a microscope? Love is a biochemical response, Dr. Steinberg said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Oxytocin, dopamine, neurological patterns we can observe and document. So when Maria's mama stays up all night holding her hand during chemo, that's just chemicals. Ali's question was gentle, not accusatory. When her daddy works 3 jobs to pay for treatments, that's just brain patterns. Maria reached for Ali's hand with her small fingers. Mr. Ali, tell Dr. Steinberg about the butterfly. Ali smiled, remembering. Few weeks ago, Maria was having a real tough day. Couldn't keep food down, felt sick from the medicine. We were sitting by the window and she was crying, asking why God would let kids get sick. Dr. Steinberg listened despite himself. Right then, this butterfly landed on the window, bright orange and black, just sitting there like it was waiting for something. Maria stopped crying and watched it for maybe 10 minutes. Then she looked at me and said, Mr. Ali, I think that's God's way of saying he's still here, even when things are scary. Coincidence, Dr. Steinberg said, but his voice was quieter now. Pattern recognition. The human brain seeks meaning in random events. Maybe, Ali acknowledged. Or maybe faith isn't about proving God exists. Maybe it's about choosing to see love in a world that gives you plenty of reasons not to. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Carmen Rodriguez, who'd been working the pediatric ward for 15 years. Her scrubs were decorated with cartoon characters, and her smile could make even the sickest children feel better. Maria, sweetie, it's time for your medicine, Carmen said, then noticed the tension in the room. Everything okay here? Doctor. Steinberg was asking about God, Maria explained with characteristic directness. Carmen glanced between the 2 men, understanding immediately. She'd seen this conversation play out before, the clash between clinical detachment and human hope. Dr. Steinberg, Carmen said carefully, can I ask you something? He nodded, curious, despite himself. Last month, when little David was dying, you stayed with his family for 6 hours after your shift ended. You held his mother while she cried. You helped his father understand the medical terms. You made sure David wasn't in pain. Carmen paused. What was that, if not faith? That was medicine, Dr. Steinberg replied, but his voice wavered slightly. Compassionate care, professional responsibility. Was it? Carmen pressed gently. Because David was going to die regardless. The medicine couldn't save him. But you stayed anyway. You chose to be present for suffering you couldn't fix. That sounds like faith to me. Ali watched the exchange with interest. This was how change happened, not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through quiet moments when people were forced to examine what they really believed. Faith isn't about having all the answers, Doc, Ali said finally. It's about showing up when you don't have any answers at all. Dr. Steinberg was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the hospital continued its eternal rhythm of healing and hoping, of science and prayer working side by side, whether anyone wanted to admit it or not. I became a doctor because I wanted to save lives, Dr. Steinberg said finally. When I can't save them, when the medicine fails, when the surgery doesn't work, he trailed off, looking suddenly older than his 53 years. That's when faith matters most, Maria said, with the wisdom that sometimes comes from facing mortality at 8 years old. Not when everything's easy, but when everything's hard. Dr. Steinberg looked at her, really looked at her. for perhaps the first time since he'd started treating her case. He saw not just a collection of symptoms and treatment protocols, but a little girl who colored pictures of heaven and prayed for other people's happiness while poison dripped into her veins. "Maria," he said slowly, "what do you think faith really means?" She considered this with the seriousness she gave all important questions. "I think it means believing that love is stronger than scary things, even when the scary things are really, really big." Ali smiled, out of the mouths of babes. "But how do you maintain that belief?" Dr. Steinberg asked, and for the first time his question sounded genuine rather than challenging. "How do you keep faith when you see children suffer, when good people die, when prayers seem to go unanswered?" Ali was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Outside Maria's window, the city of Chicago hummed with its usual chaos, traffic and sirens, and the endless motion of 8 million people trying to make sense of their lives. "Doc, you ever notice how the sun comes up every morning?" Ali asked finally. "That's astronomy, planetary rotation, predictable celestial mechanics." "Sure," Ali agreed. "But every morning people wake up and choose to get out of bed. They choose to love their families, to go to work, to try again even when yesterday was terrible. They choose to hope that today might be better." He gestured toward the window where the butterfly had appeared weeks earlier. "You can call that brain chemistry or survival instinct or whatever scientific term makes you comfortable, but I call it faith. The faith that life has meaning even when we can't see it. The faith that love matters even when it hurts. The faith that showing up is always better than giving up." Dr. Steinberg absorbed this, his analytical mind working through the implications. "But faith without evidence is just wishful thinking." "Is it?" Carmen interjected. "Dr. Steinberg, every day you prescribe treatments based on statistical probabilities. You perform surgeries with success rates that are never 100%. You recommend therapies that might work, could work, should work, according to your best understanding of medical science. Isn't that a kind of faith?" The question hit its mark. Dr. Steinberg had never thought of his medical practice in terms of faith, but Carmen was right. Every diagnosis was an educated guess. Every treatment was a calculated hope. Every surgery was an act of faith in his training, his skills, and the resilience of the human body. "That's different," he said, but his protest sounded weak even to himself. "How?" Ali asked simply. The silence stretched between them, filled with the quiet sounds of a hospital at work. Somewhere down the hall, a baby was crying. In another room, a family was celebrating a successful surgery. The eternal dance of joy and sorrow, hope and fear, faith and doubt continued its ancient rhythm. "Mr. Ali," Maria said suddenly, "remember what you told me about butterflies?" Ali nodded, smiling at the memory. "What about butterflies?" Dr. Steinberg asked, despite himself. Maria looked at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her 8-year-old face. "Mr. Ali said that butterflies start as caterpillars. They have to go into a dark place, and everything they used to be gets broken down. It probably feels like dying. But then they come out as something beautiful that can fly." She paused, considering her words carefully. Maybe that's what faith is. Believing that even when everything feels broken, something beautiful might be coming. Dr. Steinberg stared at her. This small girl who was teaching him about faith while fighting for her life. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years studying the human body, understanding its mechanisms and failures, but he'd never really understood the human spirit. "Maria," he said quietly, "are you afraid?" She nodded honestly. "Sometimes. Especially at night when the medicine makes me feel sick. But then I remember that my mama loves me, and my daddy loves me, and God loves me, and Mr. Ali comes to visit, and you take good care of me even when you're grumpy." Despite everything, Dr. Steinberg smiled. "I'm not grumpy." "You're a little grumpy," Maria said with a giggle, "but that's okay. My abuela says grumpy people just need more hugs." Before Dr. Steinberg could protest, Maria reached out and hugged him. It was awkward. She was small and connected to various medical devices, and he was tall and unaccustomed to physical affection from patients. But for a moment, something shifted in the sterile hospital room. Ali watched the embrace with satisfaction. This was what he'd been trying to explain. Faith wasn't about theological arguments or philosophical debates. It was about human connection. It was about choosing love in the face of fear. It was about showing up for each other when showing up was the hardest thing to do. "Dr. Steinberg," Ali said as Maria released her hug, "you asked where my God is. He's right here. In Maria's courage, in Carmen's compassion, in your dedication to healing, even when you can't understand why people suffer, in every choice to love instead of hate, to hope instead of despair, to keep fighting even when the odds are against you. Doctor." Steinberg straightened his white coat, a gesture that had become automatic over years of medical practice. But something was different now. The coat felt less like armor and more like a uniform of service. "I still don't understand how you can believe in a benevolent God when children like Maria get cancer," he said. But his tone had changed. The challenge was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. "I don't understand it either," Ali admitted. "But I've learned that faith isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting that love is real, even when love hurts. It's about believing that every life has value even when life seems unfair. It's about choosing to see the sacred in the ordinary, the divine in the human." Carmen checked her watch and realized her shift had ended 20 minutes ago, but she didn't move to leave. Conversations like this were rare in hospitals, moments when the clinical and the spiritual intersected, when healing meant more than just treating symptoms. "Mr. Ali," she said, "tell Dr. Steinberg about the prayer wall." Ali nodded toward the hallway. "Come on, Doc, let me show you something." They left Maria to her coloring and walked down the corridor to a section of wall that Dr. Steinberg had passed hundreds of times without really noticing. It was covered with photographs, drawings, letters, and small mementos left by families of children who had been treated in the ward. "This is our prayer wall," Carmen explained. "Families leave pictures of their kids, notes of gratitude, prayers for other families going through treatment. Some of these children recovered completely, some didn't make it, but every single one of them was loved. Every single one of them mattered." Dr. Steinberg studied the wall more carefully. There were photos of children in hospital beds surrounded by smiling families, crayon drawings of rainbows and flowers, and stick figure families. Thank you notes written in shaky handwriting by parents who had watched their children fight impossible battles. One photo caught his attention, a little boy with a bright smile and a bald head, wearing a superhero cape over his hospital gown. The note beneath it read, "Tommy fought like a superhero for 2 years. He never stopped believing he would fly again. Now he's flying with the angels. Thank you for giving us hope when hope was all we had." "Tommy Martinez," Carmen said softly, noticing where Dr. Steinberg's gaze had landed. "He was one of my first patients when I started working here. 7 years old, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He used to tell everyone he was going to be a pilot when he grew up." "What happened to him?" Dr. Steinberg asked, though he already knew the answer. "He died 3 months after that photo was taken," Carmen said simply. "But Dr. Steinberg, you should have seen him fight. You should have seen how he made other kids laugh even when he was in pain. You should have seen how his parents never gave up hope, how they celebrated every small victory, how they chose gratitude even in the darkest moments." Ali pointed to another section of the wall. "And these are the success stories. Kids who beat the odds, who went home healthy, who grew up to become doctors and teachers and parents themselves. But you know what, Doc? The ones who didn't make it, they're success stories too." "How can you say that?" Dr. Steinberg's voice was strained. "How is a child's death ever a success?" Because they lived, Ali said simply. They loved and were loved. They made a difference in the world, even if their time was short. They taught their families about courage. They showed other kids how to be brave. They reminded doctors like you why your work matters. Dr. Steinberg was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces on the wall. Each photograph represented a family's worst nightmare and greatest love story. Each drawing was a child's attempt to make sense of a world that didn't always make sense. Each note was a testament to the human capacity for hope in the face of despair. I became a doctor to save lives, he said finally. But I've lost so many patients over the years. Children who should have had decades ahead of them. Families torn apart by diseases I couldn't cure. How do you maintain faith when you see that much suffering? Ali considered the question carefully. Doc, what if saving lives isn't just about curing diseases? What if it's also about helping people live with dignity, love with courage, and hope with purpose? What if it's about being present for the sacred moments, the first breath and the last breath, and all the breaths in between? Carmen nodded in agreement. Dr. Steinberg, I've watched you work for 3 years. I've seen you stay late to explain test results to worried parents. I've seen you fight insurance companies to get kids the treatments they need. I've seen you cry in the supply closet when you thought no one was looking. That's not just medicine. That's ministry. Ministry? Dr. Steinberg repeated the word as if it were foreign. Serving something bigger than yourself, Ali explained, using your gifts to heal not just bodies but spirits, choosing to be an instrument of hope even when hope seems impossible. They walked back toward Maria's room, passing other children's rooms along the way. In one room, a teenage boy was video chatting with his classmates, determined not to miss his high school graduation despite being in the middle of chemotherapy. In another, twin sisters were having a tea party with their stuffed animals, their laughter echoing down the hallway, despite the IV poles standing sentinel beside their beds. Mr. Ali, Doctor, Steinberg said as they reached Maria's door, I have to ask you something personal. Ali nodded, encouraging him to continue. Your Parkinson's disease. How do you maintain faith when your own body is betraying you? When the thing that made you famous, your physical abilities, are being taken away? Ali smiled, and for a moment Dr. Steinberg could see the young champion who had once declared himself the greatest. Doc, my body made me famous, but my faith made me who I am. The Parkinson's is taking my coordination, my speech, my ability to move the way I used to, but it can't touch my soul. It can't take away my love for these kids. It can't stop me from believing that every day is a gift, even the hard days. He paused, looking through Maria's doorway where she was still coloring, her small tongue sticking out in concentration. You know what I've learned? Faith isn't about having a perfect life. It's about finding perfect moments in an imperfect life. It's about choosing to see the butterfly instead of just the cocoon. Dr. Steinberg followed his gaze to Maria, this 8-year-old girl who was teaching grown men about courage and hope. She's remarkable, he said quietly. They all are, Ali replied. Every kid in this ward is fighting a battle that would break most adults, but they still laugh, they still play, they still believe in tomorrow. If that's not proof of the divine, I don't know what is. Carmen appeared beside them, carrying Maria's evening medications. Gentlemen, visiting hours are almost over, but Dr. Steinberg, Maria asked if you could say goodnight to her before you leave. Dr. Steinberg hesitated. He'd always maintained professional distance from his patients, believing that emotional attachment compromised clinical judgment. But something had shifted during this conversation, something fundamental about how he understood his role as a healer. Of course, he said finally. They entered Maria's room together. She had finished her coloring and was now looking out the window at the Chicago skyline, where lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Dr. Steinberg, she said without turning around. "Do you think the people in those buildings know how lucky they are?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "They get to go home to their families tonight. They get to hug their kids and eat dinner together and watch TV and be normal." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "I used to think I was unlucky because I got sick, but now I think maybe I'm lucky because I know how special normal things really are." Dr. Steinberg felt something crack open in his chest. A wall he'd built years ago to protect himself from caring too much, from feeling too deeply, from being hurt by the inevitable losses that came with treating sick children. "Maria," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "you're one of the wisest people I've ever met." She smiled at the compliment. "My mama says God sometimes puts old souls in young bodies to teach people important things." "And what important thing are you supposed to teach?" Maria considered this with the gravity she gave all serious questions. "I think I'm supposed to teach people that love is stronger than scary things, even really, really scary things." "Doctor?" Steinberg knelt beside her bed, bringing himself to her eye level. "Maria, I want you to know something. Taking care of you, watching you be so brave, seeing how you care about other people even when you're scared, it's changed me. You've changed me." "Changed you how?" "You've reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place, not just to treat diseases, but to care for people, to be present for the sacred moments, to choose hope even when hope is hard." Maria reached out and took his hand in her small one. "Dr. Steinberg, do you think you might believe in God now?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Dr. Steinberg looked at this remarkable child, then at Ali, then at Carmen, then back at Maria. He thought about the prayer wall in the hallway, about the families who found strength in faith, about the countless small miracles he witnessed every day in the form of human resilience and love. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm beginning to believe in something bigger than myself, something that shows up in the courage of little girls who color pictures of heaven, something that moves people to dedicate their lives to healing others, something that turns suffering into compassion and fear into love." "That sounds like God to me," Maria said with satisfaction. Ali smiled, remembering his own journey from doubt to faith, from questions to trust. "Faith isn't a destination, Doc. It's a journey, and every step counts, even the small ones." As visiting hours ended and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, Dr. Steinberg found himself walking slowly through the corridors he'd traveled thousands of times before. But everything looked different now. The sterile hallways seemed warmer. The clinical atmosphere felt more sacred. The work he'd been doing for years suddenly felt less like a job and more like a calling. He stopped at the prayer wall one more time, studying the faces of children who had taught their families and their doctors about courage, about love, about faith. Tomorrow he would return to his rounds, to his patients, to the endless battle against disease and death. But he would return as a different man, one who understood that healing was about more than medicine, that hope was more than wishful thinking, and that faith was more than the absence of doubt. In her room, Maria was saying her prayers before sleep, asking God to help other sick children, to comfort worried parents, and to help Dr. Steinberg remember that love is stronger than scary things. Down the hall, Ali was preparing to leave, his daily visit complete, his mission of spreading hope and faith continuing one conversation at a time. And in the quiet moments between day and night, between doubt and belief, between fear and love, something sacred moved through the corridors of the hospital, the same something that had always been there, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to transform hearts that were ready to be changed. The question, "Where is your God now?" had been answered not with theological arguments or philosophical debates, but with the simple, profound truth that God shows up wherever people choose love over fear, hope over despair, and faith over doubt. In the courage of sick children, in the dedication of healers, in the love of families facing impossible challenges, and in the transformation of hearts that dare to believe in something bigger than themselves. Se você chegou até aqui e sentiu cada palavra dessa jornada sobre fé, coragem e transforma Cal, não vá embora sem se inscrever. Eu conto essas histórias com o coracal na mão para alcançar gente como você que sente, que se emociona, que vive. Se isso te tocou de verdade, retribui. Comenta, se inscreve, venha fazer parte dessa família comigo. Até o próximo vídeo.